All right, there we go. We got audio levels turned up on my end. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Noobie Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz, and it is good to have you here today. For those of you that are watching the live stream or watching the replay of the live stream, or if you're listening to audio, thanks for joining us in this new project. This podcast is dedicated to new photographers. If you're in the first few years of business or even just trying to get your business off the ground, this is the place for you. We're here to simplify photography and photography business for new photographers. And man, if that's you, you're in the right place. And we're actually starting this new podcast out with a series called I Wish I Knew. And I'm having established photographers come on the show and share the big idea or big principle that they wish they knew when they were first starting their business. And I'm going to introduce our guest here. Actually, you know what? We might as well just jump right into it. I'm going to introduce our guest right now. Scott Choucino is here with me. Scott, did I get your last name right this time?
That was a solid attempt.
Okay. So for anybody who doesn't know, we're kind of breaking the fourth wall here. Scott was on my other podcast, the Bokeh Photography Podcast. And Scott kind of introduced me to I guess you actually explained to me that different family members pronounce your name differently. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're sort of half Galician from Spain and half very English. So it's butchered by everyone throughout the family. So yeah,
Okay. Well, I gave it my best attempt. I hope it works for now. And I have to say thank you. I was saying this to you before we started, Scott, but I really truly appreciate you coming back on the show. You really helped level up our podcast, both my other podcast, the Bokeh Podcast, and also here at the Noobie. Your work is quite incredible. And as you're actually introducing yourself and your business just briefly, I'm going to pull up your website so everybody can kind of see what this is all about. But do let our listeners know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm I guess I'm mostly known as a food and drink photographer, and I shoot the big adverts on the billboards. And I'm currently venturing into more still life and product work as well. But basically, if it doesn't talk back, that's kind of what I do, which is sort of in direct contrast to how I started, because I started off as a documentary and portrait photographer. But yeah, it took me a while to find out what I was supposed to be doing.
Well, I just, as you were talking there, and first of all, I'm kind of laughing internally as you describe what it is that you do. If it doesn't talk back to you, that's your world, that's your game. But I have to say, and this is something that really stands out in contrast. I mean, most of the photographers that I've had on the show thus far are portrait or wedding photographers. And the same thing with the Bokeh Podcast. But occasionally we have the opportunity to have a commercial photographer, but I'm not sure that I've had such a colorful commercial photographer. I mean, and I'm speaking about your work. It really grabs your attention. And as I'm scrolling through the homepage of your site, of course, for those of you listening in, you can go to Scott Choucino. So it's Scott, just like it sounds, 2 T's, CHOUCINO.com. And same thing on Instagram. We'll link to both in the show notes at noobiepodcast.com. But your work is it's attention grabbing to say the least. And as much photography as I see, that's a major compliment to you, Scott.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful work. I know that we have just a short amount of time here, and we're going to kind of jump right into things. You've been a professional photographer now for how long?
So I started photography in about 2009, and I went pro in 2010, like an absolute idiot, thinking that was a great amount of experience to have to try and start a profession. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it didn't go very well for the first few years, and I was very poor.
Well, and so I guess this is a great segue to the conversation there. Is there a particular principle, idea, concept that you wish you had been aware of at the outset of your business that you think would have helped propel your career maybe a little bit more quickly?
I don't know about more quickly, but definitely with less stress. I'm sure like most people have heard about the 10,000 hour principle, that it takes 10,000 hours to get good at something. But the problem with photography is that photography isn't the thing. So, for example, like for me, I do bold graphic food photography. That is the thing. And it took me about 10 years of those 13 years to find the thing before I could do my 10,000 hours. So, yeah, I think just as in terms of patience and saving your mental capacity a little bit, just keep in mind that those 10,000 hours need to be on the actual thing you're going to end up doing, and that photography itself is not a job. It's not an art form. It's just the tool we use to capture what it is we do for a job.
So I know that leading up to this conversation today, the way that you communicated this principle, this idea to me was the realization of how long it actually takes to become an established photographer. Before we get into, I guess, the way that has changed your approach to business, do briefly define for us the idea of an established photographer. What does that mean to you?
So yeah, I think like it means different things at different points in your career, and I'm sure I'll change this at some point in the future. But when I started out, it would have meant shooting a magazine cover or something like that. And then by the time I shot a magazine cover, it meant shooting a billboard. And then by the time I shot a billboard, it meant shooting a worldwide ad campaign. And then it was like having the top agent and shooting the big campaigns and being at a point where people in the industry know who you are, but perhaps people on the internet don't. Because they're two very different career paths. I have a YouTube channel as well, which is actually called Tin House Studios, which has nothing to do with the work I do commercially. And people who know me through that are not the same people that know me as the commercial photographer with the agent and the big campaigns. They're two completely different worlds.
So at this point, do you feel established, or do you feel like you're kind of ever reaching to the next level?
I feel like I'm getting close.
Okay.
I shot a few really big worldwide campaigns over the last couple of years. But obviously still have the great joys of imposter syndrome, where I constantly go, I might have to get a real job one day. I don't really want to do that. But I've managed 13 years without one, so I think I'll scrape by for a few more, hopefully.
Well, I've noticed this theme actually, and I've had just a few photographers on as we're getting this podcast off the ground, but already a theme has emerged about the realization that this is a long game. One photographer described it as an endurance race. And so with this realization that, hey, it maybe takes a little bit longer than expected or than you thought to set yourself up as an established photographer in the industry, what are some specific ways that has changed your approach to business? Maybe a shift in mentality or something else that has made a difference?
Yeah, I think, I come from like a small city, so I don't live in London, and most of the work in the advertising world happens in London, Paris, or New York. And outside of that, there's nothing. So I end up commuting a lot. And one of the things being from a smaller place is I realized that there weren't that many older photographers. So I thought that I should be at the pinnacle already. But then when you sort of look around, when you do go to London or you go to Paris and you see who's shooting the big campaigns, most of these people are 50 years of age, at least. And they weren't shooting them from day one. They might have been assisting some famous photographers, but they weren't the photographer at the time. And I think it's quite an important thing to realize that it's similar to going into medicine, in that in the UK, to be a doctor, it's probably going to take you 10 years to become a doctor. Now, obviously, what we do is nowhere near as important or difficult. But to get to that elite level, it still does take a good 10 years. So having that patience just to go, it's fine. I'm enjoying the process. What I'm doing right now is enjoyable. I'm going to keep doing it. And eventually I'll get to the point I need to be at. When I first started out, there was definitely probably 10 of us in Leicester who wanted to be photographers. And I was no more talented than anybody else. Definitely not one of the more talented ones. And the only difference I can see is that I didn't quit and they did. So they all do other things now. Whereas I just carried on and sort of like stuck at it and sucked it up and did all the horrific, eating a bread sandwich because you're skint in the early days when like money's scarce and you just had to buy a new lens or something. And there's definitely and it's really easy to look back in hindsight and go, yes, well, of course it was going to be okay because, you just had to put in those years and, get the experience and all the rest of it. But at the time it feels pretty bleak. And I always even now, it still feels bleak sometimes when you're thinking, well, to get to that next level, I need, it's going to take me another probably 5 to 10 years to get to the next step up from where I am now. And that's like doubling my career length already. But understanding that enjoying the process is so important and just, just doing the work, which sounds ridiculously obvious, like you've got to do the work. But today we didn't have a client in, so we had a stylist come down from London and we've been shooting for 8 hours in here on some new work that we just thought, we'll just try some new styles, some new techniques, that sort of thing. And it's those really basic steps and just consistently putting them out there that really makes a difference, I think.
I would agree. And by the way, you may have seen me looking down. I'm taking notes here as we go, so I'm learning from the master. But I wrote down the first thing, important to realize the need for patience. And maybe we can kind of come back to that. The second thing I'm writing down here is to show up and do the work. And really the two kind of go hand in hand. So maybe I actually start with a follow-up question to that first point about patience. Is there, maybe you learned to practice that value, if you will, early on, whether it was 3 years ago or 5 years ago or whenever it was where there was a turning point for you. But how did you actively practice that? Was there, again, a shift in mindset? Did you set kind of smaller, shorter term goals that you could reach for, knowing that those would add up? What did that idea of patience look like practically?
I think a lot of it comes down to like self-preservation. So one of my big goals, like my sort of like golden ticket shoot, is to do the McDonald's main ad campaign. And 4 years ago, they approached me, or an agency who was doing the job approached me, and I was like, this is it. I'm getting it. I'm definitely getting it. It's going to happen. I'm going to make it. And it didn't come through. And, it's been 4 years and they've not got back in touch. So a lot of it's just like self-preservation. It's like, it will come back around again. I was shortlisted for at one point. I'll be shortlisted again. And the same with a lot of things. We had a lot of really big jobs come through at the start of the year that I didn't land. They went to a different photographer. All of them went to the same different photographer. And he's been doing it for 20 years longer than me. And he is a better photographer. He's a probably nicer person. And he's more expensive. So all I can do is keep working. Like, the self-preservation has to like kick in and just go, do you know what? I have to be patient. My time will come at some point. He was where I am today going, this other guy's been around for ages, is getting all the jobs because he knows everybody. And now I'm in that position. So it's trying to go, right, I can't get that job right now, but what I can do is utilize the time I've got. So whilst I'm not doing that job, I can be creating a new body of work that looks different to everybody else's. Which is why my style of work is how it is. At the time of doing it, there wasn't anyone else doing that sort of work. And it's how I landed most of my big campaigns over the last few years. And that was born out of lockdown, really. During lockdown, I could still shoot from home or from the studio, but we stayed at home because we got the kids there. So I took one camera, one lens and one light home and a stack of A4 card, and I shot an entire portfolio on the kitchen floor. And after years of shooting with like, £500,000 worth of Broncolor kit and phase 1 cameras, we used a Canon 5D and a cheap lens, and that's the portfolio of work that got me signed to a good agent and got me some good jobs. So you just got to keep going, well, it's not my time now, but I can just keep ticking over, I guess.
Yeah, and again, tied to that is the idea of showing up and doing the work. I'm going to come back to that because that's something that I've realized more and more in the last year and a half myself as well. Before I do that, though, I was taking some further notes as you were talking about this idea of patience. And this is, I'm kind of projecting on the conversation here, but it seems like in order to have patience, you've got to be confident that you're moving in the right direction. And in order to continue to show up and do the work. I mean, if you continue to show up and do the work, but you're doing the wrong work, that's not helping you a whole lot, right? So is there a way that you were able to figure out or to confirm to make sure that you were moving in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of two things. I'm going to go off on a slight tangent here. And one of them is that you have to have a side hustle. And this will make sense in a minute. But I run a YouTube channel which makes reasonable money, and I also run off the side of that. I do workshops which are digital downloads, and we do mentorships and one-to-one coaching and all the rest. And that allows me not to worry about getting jobs. Like, if I don't get a photo shoot, it no longer matters because of the side hustle I have. And that frees up a lot of space in my mind to be able to go, right, I need to make sure I'm doing the right test shoots. Now I've got this time and this like mental space as well to go, right, what's everyone doing at the moment? We'll look in the creative review. We'll look through the British Journal and see what's trending at the moment. And then as well as what's trending, what might be trending next? What's the next step going to be? And then how can I apply my style of work to that? And then, it has to be a real authentic style of work. Like the work I shoot, it's mostly junk food, mostly kids food, fast food, that sort of thing. And it's stuff that I know. I don't shoot gourmet food because I don't know anything about gourmet food. I can barely cook. Which is bizarre for a food photographer, but I can barely, beans on toast is about the best I can do.
Okay.
So applying all of that and having that like freedom financially and mentally to be able to go, right, we can sit down, we can spend 5 days looking through every magazine that's just been released in the country, cutting them to shreds, sticking them all on bits of paper and working out what's good. And then it's just applying your personal taste to that, I suppose. And then a lot of it is just hoping that people like what you like, because you really can't fake it in the commercial world when it's at that high of a level. Like if I try and shoot some like ooey gooey sort of food work, people will know I'm a fraud because it's not authentically me. And at that level, that sort of thing matters. So I just do what I know and what I like. And yeah, hope that hope that someone likes it at the end and I'm not wasting my time, which is obviously the ultimate fear.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting how this is all just kind of tying together. So first of all, before I go any further, I want to make sure that everybody knows about your YouTube channel. I'm going to pull this up on screen here. It's called Tin House Studio. We'll make sure to link to, I pushed the button. There we go. And we'll make sure to link to this in the show notes as well at newbiepodcast.com. Go to Scott's episode and we'll put the notes there. But Tin House Studio on YouTube, you've got over 30,000 subscribers. So yeah, you've got a good thing going there. But I find it interesting that, again, this is all kind of tied together. So your side hustle gives you the opportunity not only to develop your work, which is the other point that I made note of here. I mean, when you talk about the idea of patience, you're using any free time, quote unquote, to continue to develop your work. And I think that's really interesting, but you're doing that simultaneously looking at the marketplace, what is popular, what's trending at the moment, experimenting in that realm, and then creating content to go along with it. This all gives you the opportunity to not only further develop your craft, but develop your brand simultaneously. So you're making good use of that available time, I guess, while you're being patient. And I think that's really important for everybody listening in to know, especially if you're just getting started. Make good use of time. It's so easy to waste a lot of time, and I'm certainly guilty of it as well. But if we're intentional, actually taking a step back, if we first know the direction that we're going, kind of like we were talking about, Scott, something we talk about quite a bit on my other podcast is this idea of a big picture view. And very simply, I would define it as overarching set of goals. I know what I want personally out of life. As a result, I know what I want out of my business life. And that enables me to then create a business model that helps support that. So now I have some clear direction, kind of bigger picture direction that I can reach toward. As I'm developing that business model, that can help determine or drive my time management, the way that I'm managing my time. So as I'm booking clients, of course, I'm going to capitalize on those opportunities. But then if I have some extra space and time, I'm going to do what you're describing here, which is to continue to develop my craft while also using that as an opportunity to create content that builds my brand. I think it's just wonderful how you've built this out. And we've got about 3 minutes here. I want to follow up on that other major point that you made earlier, which is to show up and do the work. And it's been a theme through this conversation. And I think you were kind of alluding earlier to the idea that this is obvious, but I'm telling you, I'm 42 and deep in my career as an entrepreneur. I shot weddings. I started an editing company. We're getting ready to launch an even bigger brand now. And yet I'm just now it's just now hitting me, the significance of taking those small steps every single day. It's so easy looking at social media and other photographers' websites to get kind of obsessed about doing the big thing, getting the big gig, connecting with that big client. And the reality is we get really, really far by showing up consistently and doing those small things, quote unquote, small things every single day. What does that look like practically for you?
So yeah, I think I think the average work week when I'm not shooting for a client, say it's just me just doing me, I probably do 70 hours a week. On client weeks, it's considerably more.
Wow.
And that's fitting kids in and stuff as well. It means coming in at weekends and all the rest of it. And for me, it's little things like Mondays. If we're not shooting, Monday is marketing Monday. And that is a huge 10-hour day of just non-stop prepping the marketing just for that week. The YouTube channel, I do 2 videos a week, so that's 8 videos a month. And I film all of those on a Saturday. And then we edit them all on a Sunday evening whilst everyone else is watching Netflix. So it's trying to find those little bits of efficiency. Because there's no point just doing 70 hours work a week if it's the wrong work. It's got to be the right work.
100%.
So I treat it a lot. I come from an athletic background, despite my current appearance. And I treat it a lot like that. I've got my goal and then we work backwards. And then every day when I come in, there is a list of things to do. And I plan
there you go.
Annually, quarterly, monthly,
yes,
weekly, daily. And obviously it often goes to pot because you get a phone call halfway through the day going, can you produce a treatment for this client? And then everything goes out the window. But I think at least having a plan, even if you don't stick to it, is a really good, solid way to get the work done.
And this is such a massive topic, and we're literally at the end here, or we would dig further into it. But I think you finished up your points beautifully, which is implement a plan based on that kind of bigger picture set of goals. Implement a plan, break it down into the annual, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, and even if you don't finish every single task on the list that day, you can continue to go back to that list, figurative or literal, and continue to check those things off. And if we just do that consistently every single day, it's going to pay off in the long run. So, man, there's so much to talk about here. I know we're cutting things short, but I really appreciate kind of this introduction to this thought process. Remind our listeners one more time where they can find you online, social media, and your website as well.
Absolutely. So it's Tin House Studios for the YouTube and educational stuff. And then myself, I'm Scott Choucino, and that's Choucino, and I pretty much have my name for everything because it's a bit of a rare one. But there we go, yeah, that's me.
Perfect, and I'm popping that up on the screen as well. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. Scott, thanks again for your time. This has been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.